Felicity?
Absence from Felicity. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the when you read after the epilogue in the course?
I guess so. All right.
Felicity?
Absence from Felicity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the when you read after the epilogue. I'm getting an echo.
All
No,
right.
not.
Yeah. Because it was showing up on YouTube. And so now let me get that going over here
Okay.
on the other computer, and then they won't have to hear my silliness here. And go to our live stream here. Showing up on YouTube. There we go. And so no, turn that down. So you and I don't have to hear that. Oh, there we go. Woohoo. We're up on all everywhere.
So 47 levers and 36 buttons, and
we're here.
14 switches are pressed. We're ready to go.
Well, I think if I had it together a little bit better, it probably wouldn't take all that much.
Oh, I know when you're trying to do multiple media at once, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So welcome everyone. We're here for Absence from Felicity, and Bruce, Rawles, and I are reading this, and we're already up to chapter 5. I think this is going a little faster, I think, than some of Ken's other books, maybe, because it's a story. And so there's a lot of story here, and discussion of dreams and occurrences. And as I was saying before we started recording, there was a conversation I was listening to a Ken Wapnick recording this morning, and people were asking him about the hire shopping service, or Jesus telling Helen where to buy a coat. And he pointed out that yes, that was how she perceived it for a good time, and then at some point she realized that she didn't have to do that anymore. She already knew what she needed to do. And she never did it again, which was great relief to Ken because of all the shopping. He was always having to go shopping with Helen. So can you imagine that? Ken Wapnick following Helen around in Bergdorf's, or some some store. It's just really really funny.
Yeah, well, you do what's appropriate when you're in specific situations. Each classroom has its own appropriate responses, right?
Exactly. Absolutely.
And as the course reminds us, and certainly Ken does, is be normal, just do the appropriate thing, and remember not to make a big deal out of any specific.
Exactly.
My little buzz phrase lately has been, I'm getting help from Holy Spirit to go from the specific to the Pacific, not the ocean, but the Pacific, meaning peaceful.
Peaceful. I love it. That's very clever. I can see a meme.
Well, it rhymes. What can I say?
Well,
clever, I don't know, but it does rhyme, so it makes it a little memorable.
Rhyming is good. So, yep. All right. So how about I start reading?
Sure.
We're in chapter 5, Leading to A Course in Miracles, circa 1965. And the chapter is called There Must Be Another Way. As Helen recorded it in her autobiography, a most unexpected change came in June of 1965. What happened next is particularly hard to describe because I had reached a state of mind in which a positive response to it on my part was singularly unlikely. Nevertheless, I made one, and from that time on, a great change began. So that was Helen saying, how pivotal this thing that happened. And so Ken is going to explain. Sometime earlier, Helen and Bill had become consultants to an interdisciplinary research project at the Cornell University Medical Center, Bill's former employer. Their responsibilities included an hour-long meeting every week, which grew to epitomize all that was wrong in their personal and professional lives. The meetings were characterized by the same backbiting, if not savage competitiveness and anger they were accustomed to in their own medical center, not to mention in their own relationship. Helen and Bill hated going, feeling both uncomfortable and angry, yet believing that professionally they had no choice. And so this June afternoon, they once again prepared to go, stopping off first at Bill's East Side apartment. This time, however, their perennial negative discussion took a different turn. And so I think this is Helen's description. Bill had something on his mind, but he seemed to be quite embarrassed and found it hard to talk about. In fact, he tried unsuccessfully several times to begin. Finally, he took a deep breath, grew slightly red-faced, and delivered a speech. It was hard for him, he told me later, because the words sounded trite and sentimental, even as he said them. Nor was he anticipating a particularly favorable response from me. Nevertheless, he said what he felt he had to say. He had been thinking things over and had concluded we were using the wrong approach. There must, he said, be another way. Our attitudes had become so negative that we could not work anything out. He had therefore decided to try to look at things differently. Bill proposed quite specifically to try out the new approach that day at the research meeting. He was not going to get angry and was determined not to attack. He was going to look for a constructive side in what people there said and did, and was not going to focus on mistakes and point up errors. He was going to cooperate rather than compete. We had obviously been headed the wrong way, and it was time to take a new direction. This was a long speech for Bill, and he spoke with unaccustomed emphasis. I can just imagine how this must have been for him. There was no doubt that he meant what he said. When it was over, he waited for my response in obvious discomfort. Whatever reaction he may have expected, it was certainly not the one he got. I jumped up, told Bill with genuine conviction that he was perfectly right, and I said I would join in the new approach with him. Wow, so that's the magic moment. There must be a better way, and yes, I agree. And look at what it was that he said that he wouldn't do. He wasn't going to judge. He wasn't going to find fault. He was going to look for a constructive way to meet with the other people. I mean, that's pure pure Course in Miracles. Really?
Yeah, I mean, cooperate rather than compete, I think encapsulates it in very terse phrase. And to me, it's the total difference between the two thought systems of the ego and the Holy Spirit, which would be separate interest versus shared interest. And I remember having those thoughts when I was working in the corporate world in Northern California, and in a company with about 1,400 people at one point. And it was probably not as maybe not as severe as what Helen and Bill were experiencing, but it was a competitive environment, and your annual reviews were ranked, and all this kind of stuff, and I just felt like, gee, what a game, what a rat race kind of thing. At different times. I mean, even still, it was among the nicer places to work that I'd ever heard of or encountered at that time. But it was still like, it's like, why can't we help each other achieve the shared goal rather than everyone for themselves kind of attitude kind of thing. And and at various times I tried to encourage that in the workplace that I was at, but it's I think we all have that realization, sooner or later. It's like, this doing everything by myself just ain't cutting it. It's just trying to me at the expense of the world is just not a happy place, because it's basically all about division and duality rather than wholeness. Right.
Exactly. And I remember when that started happening to me in my career, I was I was really shifting and changing. I had really gone from being very kind of cutthroat, kind of in competition with other people that I worked with, because we were in a competitive atmosphere where if you wanted to get ahead, and especially because I'm a woman, and you really honestly at that point in my life and my career, I did have to work a lot harder just to get even the basic recognition for what I was doing. And so I had a lot of ill feelings, and I mean, it's obvious from how I'm talking about it, a lot of ill feelings about the people that I worked with, and the situation that I was in. And it ended up three times in a row, three different jobs I was fired, which I had, before that I had worked for, many years for the federal government, and they loved me and thought I was the greatest thing ever. And but out in the private world, it was a different story altogether, because there was all this competition and stuff. And so, I got fired from three jobs in a row before I finally started saying, what am I doing wrong here? And that was when I was working as a temporary worker, and was, given the idea from a guy at lunch about the book, The Disappearance of the Universe. And so, I mean, I had to go fall down to where I was actually, I mean, not that being a temporary worker is a demeaning position, because I was actually writing a technical manual for the city of Colorado Springs, and it was pretty high rated work. But it was not a permanent job, and it didn't have any benefits, and I was really feeling very vulnerable, and found the Course in Miracles. But if I hadn't have been just begging for another way, and open to it, because as long as everything was going good, there was no reason to worry. It was when things went bad that I wanted, something needed to change. So it's always for our best, no matter what could you not accept.
Yeah. I mean, everything, if you look back at your life and you realize all the things that led up to the present moment, and then try to extrapolate where things are going. And obviously not on the level of form, bodies are problematic, but if you can think of where our minds are going after studying the course for so many years, it's like, well, you know what? I think I am actually a little more peaceful, maybe even more than a little more peaceful than I was before I started reading this thing and actually practicing it even more so.
Yep. Yeah, it completely shifted me for sure. So.
Oh yeah, big time. Big time.
So you want to read on?
Sure. Ken continues his narration. One can truly say that the birth of A Course in Miracles occurred that June afternoon in Bill's apartment. In Helen and Bill's joining together to find that other way, an example of what the Course would call a, quote, holy instant, unquote, one finds a shining example of a miracle. In quotes, the holiest of all spots on earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love, unquote. And that's from text page 52. And that, who knows what version that is, but it might have been the first version because he wrote this a while ago. The results were not immediately apparent, but nonetheless, certain changes, internal and external, did begin to manifest. And then now Helen is speaking here for a while in her narration. Neither of us did very well at the meeting that afternoon, although we both tried, nor can I truthfully say that we are wholly successful even now, so many years later. I can say, however, that we kept on trying and that we have not been wholly unsuccessful either. Many unexpected things have happened since. I will touch on some of the more factual changes which took place first, because these are comparatively easy things to talk about. The other kinds of, in brackets, internal experiences, of which there have been a great number, and then brackets see below in Ken's comments, will be more difficult to describe. Most of the words I would need to picture them accurately have not been invented as yet. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, the ineffable it's always a good backup word when you can't find words to describe things, right? I like the word ineffable. It covers a lot of ground.
It's
Uh,
pretty funny that most of the words I would need to picture them accurate have not been invented as yet, and probably have not been invented even now.
yeah,
So
there
ineffable,
might even be some expletives that hadn't been invented for Helen's case. I don't know.
more than likely.
Okay, shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. Ken continues. The facts are simple. Actually, Helen continues, excuse me. Helen continues. The facts are simple. The whole climate of the department gradually changed for the better. Bill worked particularly hard on this, determined to turn hostilities into friendships by perceiving the relationships differently. It took considerable effort on his part, but he did succeed eventually. Tensions lessened and antagonisms dropped away. The wrong people left, though on friendly terms, and the right ones came along almost immediately. A new and secure position opened up for me. Although our efforts were sometimes inconsistent and often half hearted, there is little doubt that they showed results. In time, the department became smooth functioning, relaxed, and efficient. Meanwhile, I felt impelled to pick up my earlier friendships, which had been broken off for one reason or another. In some cases, this was very difficult, especially when the breakup had been accompanied by marked hostility, and I had felt unfairly treated in the course of it. In one case, I hesitated for over a year, yet I vaguely recognized that these reparatory steps were essential. They seemed to be part of a mandatory preparation period. As the departmental situation improved, Bill turned his attention to straightening out his own social relationships too. We both felt this was crucial. For the most part, we did well with these attempts. We had much greater difficulty with our own relationship. We tried to be charitable and understanding toward each other, especially since we had embarked on a new approach, which obviously should be extended to ourselves, and one which had already proved to be well worthwhile. Yet, although we became increasingly willing to recognize our own impatience and lack of appreciation toward one another, and did make significant improvements in these respects, we continued to experience sudden outbreaks of antagonism toward each other, sometimes for trivial reasons and sometimes for no reason at all. This upset us both very much, for we both realized that this was a serious roadblock to cooperation and to real progress, and one which we would have to overcome. Wow, doesn't that sound like everyone's experience with the course just in some way or another?
It does, and what it sounds like to me, it's like a holy relationship. It's like
Mhm,
we're developing a holy relationship
mhm,
by their decision to share a purpose and to try to overcome all these difficulties. So
mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah,
What an incredible gift that is.
yeah. And it seems like in one way or another, I think on some deep level, we all acknowledge and recognize, oh, sometimes not very consciously, but there must be another way, as Helen and Bill began, and that when you start looking at the contents of your mind, it becomes more and more apparent how ambivalent we all are, which is, Helen's story on steroids, and how we all vacillate between sanity and insanity, and sometimes moment to moment to moment. Sometimes it's, we can go, momentarily relax into a sane, peaceful perspective that realizes that condemnation is crazy, and then the next second later, find some little nitpicky issue to get upset about around the house, or with someone you see in the media, or hear about, or family member, or another driver on the road, your own body, or someone else's body, what certain bodies on the planet do to other bodies. I mean, the variations are endless, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, well, any excuse,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Basically, I mean,
any excuse for
we hardwire our minds, and then appoint our bodies as the representatives of the ego mind to become, mercenary victims of the ego's war. And it's just nuts when you look at it, isn't it?
it really is. And Yeah, it's like compulsive. It's
Oh,
like,
very much so. Yeah.
and unless you're paying attention, it seems like it's normal and natural.
Right.
That's
Right.
what, that's what it really has occurred to me, is that, how much of the behavior that I had always thought was normal and natural was really destructive to me and
Yeah.
around me. And it
Yeah.
wasn't, I mean, it wasn't helpful,
Right. Now,
besides that.
and like the disclaimers on movies with animals say, no real harm was done to our real being, no animals, so to speak, were harmed in the making of this movie of the life of Lynn, the life of Bruce, and the life of whoever else is listening. Sharonda,
Exactly.
Regis, Sharon, Elizabeth, Gloria, and how many others? Who knows? At some future point, might hear this. It's like but it's all dream stories. It's all made up, and that's why we can afford, not derisively or means in any kind of mean spirited way, but just gently laugh at our own obsession for making such big deals about everything, and for our ambivalence. One moment in a clear-minded state, we realize, oh, I don't need to judge this. I don't need to try to fix everything, because I don't even know what needs fixed, or if it even needs fixing. But
I,
yeah,
I
go
don't
ahead.
even know what it is.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't
Yeah,
even know what this is.
yeah.
I just have an idea in my mind. And as Jesus exhorts us in the theme of special relevance this time with our lessons, what is sin? And he says, when are you going to put down those sharp-edged children's toys?
Hmm.
I mean, this is it. There, and we were having a discussion this morning in our group about, well, why children, it just children are innocent. They aren't, having being a problem. Well, yeah, and they're innocent and they're playing with toys, and that's us. We're
Hmm.
innocently playing with these sharp-edged toys,
Hmm.
thinking that we can hurt ourselves and hurt other people. And really, we can't hurt anything at all. They are toys. This is a nursery school, basically.
Goo goo and gaga.
Gaga. But we can put
Yep.
down we can put them down, and I see that's what Bill and Helen are attempting to do, is
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
them down, and we'll read as we read through the book how hard that really is.
Yeah, I mean, another point that I find really helpful, and I keep coming back to, that is, like, the more we really pay attention to the contents of our mind and see how ghastly but forgivable, because it's not real, our children's toy thoughts are about attack and victimization and the whole attack, um, defense guilt cycle, that's basically, you know I was attending for the second time, an exercise class at one of the fitness centers here where we moved in, and the lady was giving a routine where you do a little boxing, as far as aerobics and weights and stretching. It's kind of part of this 1 hour class, and there's one part where you do little boxings where you do punch punch jab jab kind of thing, and it's like, and then you retreat. It's like, well, that's that whole boxing fighting stance is kind of like ego's whole operation. It's like, well, I'll project out what I don't like about myself, then I'll attack it, and then, now that I know I should expect a retaliatory counterattack from what seems to be outside, but it's really coming from my own mind, I feel guilty because I've made the separation real, and then I start the whole cycle over again. But it's pretty crazy, isn't it? I mean, when you think about the mechanisms that we employ and the countless variations, but just watching our mind and seeing how, it seems like sometimes things are getting worse when you really look carefully at your thoughts. But it's just we've been crazy all along, and now we're just noticing it. And so the contrast is just more obvious, especially when we really do give ourselves a well-deserved, completely, 100% all the time deserved break from our insanity, and have moments of peace. That the depth of that peace, um, really stands out in such sharp contrast to when we're back at it again with our mental pugilistics, right?
Exactly. And sin
Put them
isn't
up, projections.
That's it. Put them up. Yep. Yep. Sin is insanity. And it's a dance. See
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah.
You're dancing back and forth and
Yeah, yeah.
we're dancing with the devil,
It's
you
a
know?
dance of death. Yeah. The dance of oblivion. Yeah. I try to remember that, death and birth and oblivion are all, ways that we make the body real. We make the dream real. We make the ego's thought system real, and none of them are, right? In truth.
Exactly. It's just, it's a game.
Yeah.
And if we recognize that we're just playing a game here, and it's not a fun game, I mean, a lot of it is fun and we have a great time and we love it and we have a wonderful time. But that all that beauty and all that joy, that stays with us. We don't have to stay here to hang on to that joy. We can leave the world and all the love will be still there, just not the pain. So
Mhm.
yeah. So okay. So
You want to read on?
okay, I'll read on. Okay.
And we're at toward the bottom of page 95 in the print version, if anybody wants to read on with it.
Okay.
It has a print version.
And on the Kindle version, it says page 85. So
Okay.
you're way ahead of me. And but I think the type, the size of the font that I picked.
There's
So
another one of the countless variations of illusions of differences, right?
that's right. Or location 1628 of 9,551. So
There you go.
that's even more specific. So, all right. So Ken continues, as we shall see below, on any kind of observable level, Helen and Bill never truly succeeded in healing their own relationship. If anything, with the exception of the period that began now, their external relationships seemed to worsen over time. Concurrent with the changes that Helen and Bill consciously strove to apply to their relationships, a purely internal set of experiences began for Helen as well. It was almost as if Helen had waited all of her life for Bill to make this "there must be another way" speech. This seemed to act as a stimulus that triggered off a long series of inner experiences that can be categorized variously as visions, dreams, heightened imagery, and the psychic. So she now went into a world that was pretty scary for a person who was a psychologist, who who if someone came to them with these stories about what was happening to them, she might diagnose them or give them drugs or something for it, or therapy or something for it. But it's happening to her now, and she has a completely different response. So this is Helen speaking. It was while we were trying to straighten things out between us that another kind of experience began. It may seem somewhat more plausible if I introduce this by mentioning a characteristic of mine, which I have had ever since I can remember. When I closed my eyes, I would often see very clear mental pictures. They were, this happens to me too. They were so much a part of my own awareness that I thought they happened to everyone. The pictures could be of anything: a woman with a dog, trees in the rain, a shoe store window, a birthday cake with lighted candles, a flight of stairs down the side of a cliff. Sometimes I would recognize part of a picture as related to something I had actually seen, but even then there were details I knew had not been there originally. Most of the pictures did not seem to be associated with anything. A few other images I identified as my own imaginary pictures of how someone was going to would look, or what a place I was going to visit would look like. Pictures of this kind rarely turned out to be accurate, but they still rose to mind in connection with the people or places originally giving rise to them. The pictures were particularly sharp just before I fell asleep, but I often became aware of distinct visual images during the day, even when my eyes were open, while I talked with someone else, and even when I was by myself. In fact, the pictures seemed almost to represent the words or thoughts as corresponding symbols at a different but related level of consciousness. They could come at virtually any time. They did not interrupt or even disturb my overt activities in any way. It was as if there were a constant mental activity going on in the background that could be brought to the foreground at any time I chose to notice it. For years, the pictures had been motionless and exclusively black and white, appearing much like a series of stills, often without any obvious relationship or progression. As our, quote, adventure and cooperation, unquote, continued, however, the pictures began to take on color and motion, and soon afterwards frequently appeared in meaningful sequences. So too did my dreams, which often continued with themes begun before I fell asleep or with images from dreams of the preceding night. So this is really an interesting thing. And I mean, I do this. I thought everybody did this, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is something unusual, but I'm always seeing pictures and little vignettes and stories and things happening to people I don't even know, places I've never seen or been.
Mhm.
I just think that it's kind of seeing into another part of the dream,
Yeah.
that that it's all here and I'm just connecting somehow with it.
Mhm.
Because I used to, when we lived up in Broomfield, when I worked at Rocky Flats, I would, at night when I would go to bed, I would close my eyes and I would have like a whole gallery, hundreds of beautiful sharp pictures that would just stream across my vision. I would just see picture after picture after picture after picture, and I called it my gallery. I don't
Hmm.
know when it started, and I don't know when it stopped. But I mean, I honestly think it's connecting with either some part of my experience that I'm not aware of, because our whole existence is, I mean, we're connected to everything. So there's nothing that we're not connected to. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
I may be seeing something in another place going on. People change a tire at the side of the road. Why would that come into my vision? And I have a whole scenario of two people changing a flat tire. You know,
Now here's where the dualistic dream comes into play. When you said people changing a tire at the side of the road, I was thinking, well, yeah, if your sweater's too warm, you might want to change that attire.
change out a tire. Oh, that's hilarious. But I don't know, do you?
Oh, as far as the imagery, yeah, yeah, I have occasionally have of lucid dreams or visions and hypnagogic, even sometimes during the day when I'm just kind of relaxed and just seemingly random stuff comes into mind, and just like it might be pertinent to what I'm involved in at the moment, or it might be, like you say, totally irrelevant, just kind of out of the blue kind of stuff. But I think that's probably pretty normal for a lot of people. But in one way, I think it's, in a sense, it's kind of irrelevant. It's like, because everyone's path is different. It's, of course, tells us we're in a highly individualized curriculum. And there's some people that, like, for example, my stepson, he when he is asked to picture something in his mind, it's like, you know, blank, just nothing. Now, whether or not that's actually what's going on or not, but that's his account anyway. And so, I know some people have really vivid visual kinds of phenomena going on, and others not so much. But ultimately, all images are distortions of our real identity. Not that there's anything good or bad about any of our dreams, which is what the Holy Spirit would categorize them all as. It's just, but we can use each of our dream experiences, whether we call it a waking dream or a daytime dream. Right now I'm looking at two frame posters of course quotes that are on the wall that I finally hung up the other day. I must have decided wrongly one, and I'm here only to be truly helpful one. And anyway, so I'm thinking, well, there's a nice hallucination, in one corner of the room I'm in. But it's all hallucination. Everything that's specific is ultimately a hallucinatory experience. But we can use our interpretations of every specific thing to either help or hinder us, depending on which thought system we're using. Right?
Well, yeah, and the thing is that, these things are not given to us, and we don't have them, so that we can have fond memories of the hallucination I had earlier. Because, I mean, that's that's our whole life, but so that we can forgive, And
Right.
even, whatever it may be, I may be thinking about those people who were, on the side of the road and feeling sad for them and worried about them and having
Hmm.
all sorts of, emotional content based on my experience of having a flat tire. And so, but that's not given to me so I can feel bad for strange people that I don't even know. It's given to me so I can forgive the idea that something can go wrong, that there is, a possibility of having a flat tire.
So just did this vision you have seem like it could have been about 7 weeks ago, about 20 miles from Phoenix, and the flat tire was on a U-Haul trailer, and then there was a lady who was taking a straw from her ice water and blowing it through the mesh of a cat cage to keep two cats hydrated while the U-Haul repair truck came and 112-degree weather. No,
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 not
okay.
that vivid, but now I see it all. My goodness.
That was
You're
probably
crazy
one of our
time.
more challenging moments on our trip here in July. So
That's pretty funny. Yeah, Sharonda is in Arizona, probably nowhere near where you are, but it's
we talked about that. Yeah,
yeah.
earlier.
So
I now have a sense of where Cornville is. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So yeah, no, not like that. But now that I'm seeing it in my mind, I'm sending out loving vibes to y'all in the past.
Oh, thank you.
And
It helps. And I picked up on it. But I think I might have shared this story on that occasion that morning. And I don't think I probably count on one hand and have plenty of fingers left over. Have had dreams about law enforcement officers. I don't know why, no particular reason, or maybe just poor recollection. But that particular morning, and waking up in Henderson, Nevada, before we headed out for here, I had a dream about being on the road and having a highway patrol guy walk up to a passenger side of the car and window roll down and ask how you doing and in this dream he said how you doing and we confirmed that we are okay and and then it was a very pleasant exchange and a very helpful one and I was like, wow, this definitely must have been a precognitive dream because that's exactly what happened several hours later. And when we had this left tire on the U-Haul trailer we were pulling below, and here we were on the side of the road, trying to running the running the engine to keep the AC going and keeping cool. And another nice lady stopped by and here's some water. She had a couple little plastic cups of water that she had, and we had enough if she hadn't, but it was nice of her to offer that, and yeah, so it was like, okay, angels are looking out for you.
That's right. Well,
Yeah,
in the fact that you had a precognitive dream about it it was actually the scenario you were there, but because it's all one big dream, and
yeah, yeah,
so you were just moving ahead in the dream and seeing the future, and then being assured that, oh, okay, everything's going to be okay, even when you have this big blowout, which
yeah,
you didn't anticipate at all. You had forewarned is forearmed. That's what I always say,
yep,
because I think the Holy Spirit tells me, it's not the Holy Spirit saying, Lynn, watch out, this is going to happen. But I know it, and so what is it? Well, it's my own being who already knows all the content of the dream. Just remembering, what the story I made up. I guess I don't know. I don't know, but I think that um, again, these dreams are just like everything else. They're opportunities for forgiveness, and we can avoid a lot of future pain by forgiving the situation before it occurs.
yep.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that could very well have been the mechanism there of just pre forgiveness, proactive forgiveness. Because
yeah,
I was actually a lot calmer than I thought I might be in that situation, and I think it was helpful to my wife Nancy that I remained relatively calm, in that situation, and we just did what we needed to do, and first we called the AAA, and then they said, no, we don't handle trailers, but try U-Haul, and sure enough, they came out. sort order, but everything was actually very helpful, and I just kind of held that thought, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was welcome to Arizona. So
Yeah. Yeah, but
whatever trouble you
it's
have,
been really, uh, I think it's the what you bring to each situation is really it, isn't it? I mean, because um, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
as
exactly.
the course would say, and we all know that it's which thought system we use in any situation makes all the difference, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and man, I'll tell you, that is the difference between love and fear. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
and when you're cool with things, you can be love, and love can help everything around you. I mean, you helped that police officer, you helped that lady who, the stopping by to give you water. She felt good about herself, and it made her a happier person that you were there.
yeah, yeah.
And, I mean, it's just you were just bringing joy to everybody.
Well, yeah, I think I I probably do that more often than I would have done years ago. Certainly before, practicing the course a bit more. I had another episode. I won't go into too much detail, but Monday morning, um, I hadn't taken my blood pressure for a long time, and it's like, oh, it's quite a bit higher than it usually is. And I was feeling just a little bit lightheaded. I thought, much as I hate to go to go to the doctor, I said, I better have this checked out. And so I went to the ER, and then they did an EKG, and it was like, it's like, oh, do I have to? Kind of, that whole thing is, but then you realize, well, yeah, I probably should, just to make sure everything's okay. And everything was, but and that the lady who checked me in at the front counter was super nice, and we laughed about, I can't remember what we were talking about, but and then similar kinds of conversations with the nurse that got me situated in the room and checked my blood pressure, and then the cardiologist, or I'm not sure if that's what his anyway, he's the guy that did the EKG and hooked up all the electrodes. We had a good chat, and as did two or three other people that came in and out of the room. And it was like, I just realized, well, maybe it's just there to not only reassure myself that everything was going to be okay, but also, um, meet some new friends, and that's kind of what it felt like, but anyway.
That's what it is. I mean,
Yeah.
the only purpose is, to connect you with another, in the sonship, and
Yeah. Yeah.
to remember the truth of our whole situation. So,
Yeah.
I love
And,
it.
and one of the nurses said, not to worry. She says, on every shift, I get at least one person like yourself who, has a high blood pressure reading, and they come in just to check it out, and don't feel bad. It's okay. Fair enough. Okay. And then, of course, it's dropped way down since it's the white coat syndrome, which really is, it's always about the mind, because our minds really do, um, you know, change everything,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and it's I don't I think I might have mentioned this last week about my son, who had medical symptoms that he was just ignoring, and
Uh,
ignoring for a long time, and not going and getting taken care of, and finally when he was, I kept telling him, you got to go to the ER, you got to go to urgent care, you got to do something, and finally he did, and when he did, he was internally hemorrhaging, and he had
oh,
lost a lot of blood. He had like half. He hadn't lost enough blood that they had to give him transfusions.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it turned out he
Hmm.
had a problem, and spent several days in the hospital, and had surgery, and went through all kinds of stuff. But that's the opposite. That's the person that says, I'm just going to wait.
Yeah. Well, I've done my share of that too, but I think that the moral of the story is I reminding myself is to be preemptive in not just doing things physically, but preemptive in noticing when we're not at peace, and using that as a trigger to see our internal doctor, Doctor Holy Spirit,
Yep,
who tells us to forgive, and that's the prescription du jour. But
that's
it's
it.
valid for every day. It's in every moment of every day.
That's perfect. Yeah. So you want to read on? We're at dreams.
Okay, sure. I've got us at the bottom of page 96, and Ken resumes his commentary. During the 4-month period that preceded the scribing of A Course in Miracles, 3, quote, more or less distinct and sequential lines, unquote, of visions and dreams, dream images reached Helen's, quote, startled awareness, unquote. Helen observed them as if she were looking at a movie, and so she experienced herself more as an observer in this experience than a participant. This was so even when, as was most often the case, she was looking at herself. It was as if one aspect of herself were observing another. Well, isn't that the case for all of us most of the time? Okay, now Helen's commentary continues. Perhaps you could call them all dream material, since they took place when my eyes were closed, either briefly or in sleep. Parts of them came to me during my early attempts to, quote, meditate, unquote, a process which Bill was convinced would be helpful to us, but which I did not understand and found vaguely frightening. Bill, however, was reading books on the subject, and I listened to his eager accounts with some irritation. That sounds typically Helen, doesn't it? I did not feel that our agreement to try a new approach to problems justified entering into, quote, crackpot, unquote, areas. Oh, that's funny. I had believed for some time that charity is a prerequisite for mental health, and one which also tends to prevent ulcers and reduce blood pressure, speaking of which. However, things like ESP flying saucers, spirits from another world, and Indian mysticism were something else. On the subject of God, I had become an uneasy agnostic. Over considerable resistance, I finally read a bit on meditation and was by no means optimistic about its possibilities. Still, I felt that closing my eyes for a few minutes several times a day would probably be restful, if nothing else, as I was generally pretty tense and inclined to hypertension. Besides, Bill's enthusiasm struck me as somehow contagious, as well as aggravating, and we agreed to try it for a few minutes together during the day, and also to continue separately in the mornings when we woke up and before going to sleep at night. It was during these times that the first picture sequence began. Do you want to pick up from there?
Sure. And yeah, it's interesting, this 1965.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a thing that was being experienced in our
Oh,
culture.
yeah. Yeah, a lot of Eastern mysticism was becoming popular.
I know I knew about meditation and everything then, and I was born in 53, so in 65 I'd have been about 12. So, but I knew what that was. So, interesting that it was becoming part of our culture.
Yep.
And here is our dear Helen experiencing it. So Ken says, here then is Helen's own account of these experiences, beginning with the priestess vision, partially quoted in chapter 1. The experiences somewhat overlapped each other, but Helen presented them separately in 3 series for the sake of clarity, as I do here. They reflect a quite different side to Helen, and this first experience in particular reflects the self beyond the personal that I mentioned in the preface to this book. And so these are the dreams. Series 1, or visions, whatever. Okay. Series 1. The first of the series began with a picture of an unrecognizable female figure, heavily draped and kneeling with bowed head, sorry. Bowed or bow. Maybe she had a bow on her head.
The double entendre of our dualistic language, once again. It's
I'm sorry.
head. That's funny. That's good.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
Laughter is crucial.
It is, absolutely. No, I can't get it out of my head. So.
I'm picturing little bows in her hair too. Yeah.
Okay, so thick chains were twisted around her wrists and ankles. A fire rose high above her head from a large metal brazier, standing near her on a low tripod. She seemed to be some sort of priestess, and the fire appeared to be associated with an ancient religious rite. This figure came to me almost daily for several weeks, each time with a noticeable change. The chains began to drop away and she started to raise her head. At last she stood up very slowly, with only a short, unconnected length of chain still tied to her left wrist. The fire blazed with unaccustomed brightness as she rose. I was quite unprepared for the intensity of my emotional reaction to her. When she first raised her eyes and looked at me, I was terribly afraid. I was sure she would be angry and expected that her eyes would be filled with condemnation and disdain. I kept my head turned away the first few times I saw her after she stood up, but finally made up my mind to look straight at her face. When I did, I burst into tears. Her face was gentle and full of compassion, and her eyes were beyond description. The best word I could find in describing them to Bill was innocent. She had never seen what I was afraid she would find in me. She knew nothing about me that warranted condemnation, yet she did know many things I had never known, or at least had entirely forgotten. I loved her so much that I literally fell on my knees in front of her. Then I tried unsuccessfully to unite with her as she stood facing me, either by slipping over to her side or drawing her to mine. I noticed that she still had a few links of chain around her wrists. That, I felt, was probably the problem. My next reactions were even stranger. I was suddenly swept away by a sense of joy so intense I could hardly breathe. Aloud, I asked, "Does this mean I can have my function back?" The answer, silent but perfectly clear, was, "Of course." At that, I began to dance around the room in an intense surge of happiness I had never felt before. I could not have believed it was possible to experience such happiness as that answer brought with it. And for a little while, I kept repeating, "How wonderful! Oh, how wonderful!" There seemed to be no doubt that there was a part of me I did not know, but which understood exactly what all this meant. It was a strangely split awareness of a kind, which was to become increasingly familiar. So, wow, 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 wow. I mean, I didn't get if this, I'm going to go back and look. These are not dreams. Um, what it, I just want to see. Okay, their experiences, and they must have been experiences that she had while she was awake. That's, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, as you're reading that, the image that came to me was image from I think one of Manly Hall's books, which I still have. I was going to sell it, but maybe it's a good thing I didn't. I'll see if I can find it because it's like I'd forgotten that this like the tripod with the kind of the Olympic torch kind of metal bowl with fire.
Mhm.
That kind of image comes to mind with the high
Right.
priestess standing beneath it kind of thing and receiving the inspiration. And anyway, that I just looked up Oracle of Delphi online, and I see this Greek runes with basically a tripod of Greek columns, and it's like, okay, well, I think might have to do a little digging and see if I can find it because I think that's sort of an interesting image, and maybe that's where the Greek mythology um, had some sort of connection there. But,
Well,
anyway,
it's interesting that, I mean, okay, so I did go back and look, and these were meditations. So
hmm
it was meditating. They were meditating in the morning and in the evening.
uh-huh.
So these were meditations. So during this meditation, she was having these visions, and day after day after day, she was seeing a vision of the same person,
hmm
but in a different condition every time. And when the chains and the bows and everything came off, and they stood up and looked at her, when she saw them, she recognized just pure love and
Yeah, the
innocence.
innocence. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And so, I mean, I think, I'm sure they're going to talk more about it. There's let's see, how much more do we have in this section?
There's a couple more paragraphs we could finish easily.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'll just read these 2 paragraphs
Sure.
and before we see series 2. Okay. So the priest is still, this is this Helen now talking?
Yes, it's still Helen. Yeah.
Okay. All right. No, this is Ken, I think. The priestess still turns up from time to time. Written in approximately 1971, I am not aware of Helen's experiencing her as a visual symbol after that time, but I've never, that's Ken's aside.
Yeah.
So this is Helen. The priestess still turns up from time to time, but I have never been able to identify completely with her yet. Whenever I see her, though, I am strongly impelled to try. Perhaps I will succeed when Bill and I have finally worked out our relationship once and for all. After all, she still wears just a bit of chain around her wrist, though it does seem to be getting smaller.
What a great metaphor. I mean, the chain meaning our investment in the ego propaganda, basically, that keeps us enslaved mentally, and as contrasted by the light of that eternal flame above, metaphorically, that's waiting with infinite patience for us to be guided home to where we never left.
Yeah, just exactly. And just to think that the chain keeps getting smaller, like Bob Marley, not Bob Marley. His chains were getting smaller too.
Marley's ghost.
His chain smoking.
There you go. Should I finish the last paragraph?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Then Ken continues, this vision is interesting for a number of reasons, aside from the obvious one of Helen's experiencing the innocence of Christ, so different from her and our self-perceptions of unworthiness. This experience also reflects Helen's conscious perception of 2 selves, innocence and guilt, the priestess and her ego self. The priestess was thus an extremely important symbol for Helen, and identification with her came to represent Helen's goal of remembering her eternal innocence. Helen's seeming inability to unite with this innocence in herself reflected her inability in her lifetime consciously to forgive Bill, except for rare moments to be discussed later. And yet the happy end of the vision does certainly reflect forgiveness, pointing to Helen's priestess self, with capital S, self, with which I shall conclude this book. A later vision involving an ancient scroll found in a cave reflects the same forgiveness, and so we shall postpone any further discussion until then. And that's the end of series 1, and I'm going to sign off until next week. And thank you again, Lynn, as always, and everyone for participating, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and I appreciate you.
Oh, likewise, so much. This is such a joy to reread this with you.
I know, it's exciting and fun, and I'm seeing so many things that I didn't see before, so I love it. All right.
Likewise.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Lynn.